Just checking.
Hello everyone, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started, and it is my honor to introduce Lady Long Soldier. Lady Long Soldier is a Oglala Lakota poet, writer, feminist, and activist. She holds a BFA in creative writing from the Institute of American Indian Arts and an MFA with honors from Bard College. She's the author of the chapbook Promo Samori and the full-length collection Whereas, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award and a finalist for the National Book Award. She has also won the National Artist Fellowship from the Arts and Cultures Foundation, the Winning Writers Award, and a Lannan Literary Fellowship. In 2012, her participatory installation, Whereas We Respond, was featured on the Pine Ridge Reservation. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Long Soldier's Whereas poems, some of which are collected in our LNT anthology, may be read as a writing back, a response to the 2009 Congressional Resolution of Apology to Native Americans. I also read her work in relationship to what Roxanne Femart Ortiz calls as a call for rethinking of the consensual national narrative and as a challenge to U.S. settler colonialism. In Whereas, official state speak is brought into the poems in order to question the former's claims, defy its authority, and show its injustice. The bureaucratic language, quote, whereas the arrival of Europeans in North America opened a new chapter in the history of Native peoples, unquote, is interrupted and interrogated by the poet speaker with images of daily life, caring for her daughter, speaking with friends, questioning the intersections and sometimes impositions of identity and authorship, going to the dentist, writing poems. Present are meditations on language and power, trauma and liberations, art making, and consideration of what is and is not translatable from word to word, culture to culture. Long Soldier writes, I am a citizen of the United States and an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe, meaning I am a citizen of the Oglala Lakota Nation. And in this dual citizenship, I must work, I must eat, I must art, I must mother, I must friend, I must listen, I must observe, constantly, I must live. The title of her talk and presentation today is I like to remember poesis means to make. We've been talking in my workshop a lot about etymologies, poesis as a making, and she'll be sharing with us about poetry and poetics beyond the page. Please help me welcome Lady Long Soldier. Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning, or Kuntani Washte, in our language. If we have any native students of faculty here, Layli, Kichi Hanska, Layli Long Soldier, Machiaki, the Yahipi Nachante Washte, Nabeshi Sati, and I just said come here with a good heart and a warm hand or something like that. I'm happy to be here. I'm also a little rusty. I haven't been traveling or speaking publicly as much as I used to. I think, like a lot of you, with COVID and the pandemic, things have changed. So I'm gonna give this a try. We'll see how it goes.
I heard that some of you are writing essays right now. Is that correct? Yeah. That's great though, because today I'm going to actually share with you an essay that I recently wrote and was published, what I might call a hybrid essay. And so I thought it would be fun. I'm going to read a lot of it. I'm going to maybe skip over a few parts for the sake of time. I read this at another event and it took an hour to read the whole thing. So I'll skip over a few parts, but actually I'm going to read quite a bit of it. And but then after that, I'm going to move into talking about um, materials, form, and making, because as we said, police is really the root of it. It means to bring into existence, to make something. And I wanted all of us to remember as writers or as poets, we are making things, and there's all kinds of things that go into all kinds of materials and building blocks that go into what we're making, right? Whether you're making a poem, whether you're making an essay or what have you. So this essay, I'm going to ask you to bear with me, okay? Because some of it is very prosy, lots of text. Part two, if you can hang in there with me, moves into there's photographs and a project, a collaborative art project I made with my kid. So, and I write a little bit about that process of making, like what went into it. So then after I read the essay, we'll explore a little bit more of that. Okay, you can actually find this online if any of you guys want to reference it at home or go back to it. I wrote an essay titled Now You Will Listen, Trust Issues with American Schools and the Care of Our Native Children. So I have a teenager at home that just turned 16, and but when I wrote this was 15, and we have some issues, trust issues at the high school. Keiko was attending a fancy art school in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we lived. And some things happened over the course of the year. Actually, what I wrote in this essay is just a small portion of what happened at school. And this year, I'm actually homeschooling our kid. I'm kind of done with it. And since I am an educator, I feel capable of doing that. But there are so many things that our young people encounter in public schools, in settings and environments where they often feel isolated, or our histories, our languages, our philosophies, our understandings are not really and are not widely understood among faculty and students, and so it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of emotion for our young people to be able to go into these environments and explain themselves. And then sometimes when they explain themselves, it creates a ripple effect, and this is what we're going to think about, or what I started thinking about when I wrote this. And again, forgive me, I'm going to do my best with time, so I will probably skip over some parts and just summarize it for you, but we'll see how it goes. Part one, forms. So again, we're going to think about forms a bit today. Okay, that's forms in writing and forms also in making material objects, okay? But forms translate also, you would say, to the human body, right? Whatever this is inside of us, whether we call it our soul, our spirit, our essence, our energy, we're born and we're trapped, I don't know if that's the right word. We're inside this form, this physical form. And we have to navigate the world with this form. So here we are, my child, a teenager. Midterm projects were due the next morning, and oh my God, why did this kid wait until the night before? Have you guys been in that situation? I wanted to die. Why? It's sophomore year in high school, and the last minute pressure was palpable, radiating in every corner of our house. There were three choices for history midterm assignments. Among them, one was especially troubling. Students were asked to watch a YouTube video titled as, quote, Bizarre Foods of a Certain Asian Country. Answer a questionnaire about the video, then research and write about foods of their own choosing from other nations and cultures. My kid purposely chose to work with this problematic video because there was something that couldn't be overlooked, central to how the school discusses, quote, other cultures. 10 p.m. quickly turned into midnight as I watched my teenager pace the living room, searching for the words to address a distasteful American lens, exemplified literally and figuratively in his video, through which we refuse to view the world. As I lay on the couch as, quote, moral support, I lay on the couch as moral support, waiting as the living room lights seemed to glow lower and lower, as my eyes blinked for longer, more luxurious moments until they finally blissfully shut. Then at 3 a.m., God help me, my kid asked me to read the essay. Oh my God. It's too much. I don't know, guys. I mean, kids are such a blessing, but man, it's work this morning. All right. I want to share a few positive notes. So I'll begin with how the essay examined the issues of land culture and the ingredients for Dana blue corn mush and Hopi peaky bread. My kid is Dana on the paternal side and grew up on the Navajo Nation, so this was a natural fit. First, I commended the recognition of the Dana and Hopi nations as sovereign and therefore perfectly suited for a world history assignment. Secondly, these nations are neighbors to each other, sharing similar landscape, vegetation, and climate. Blue corn mush and peaky bread require the same three ingredients: blue cornmeal, water, and juniper ash. Yet they are prepared in different forms. Forms again, right? So, alternate expressions of the same ingredients. Excellent observation, I said. But the first half of my kid's paper critiqued the teacher's midterm assignment itself. This is more difficult to discuss because recounting the details of what happens next drains energy rather than gives energy. Sometimes I think to myself, I am already so tired. I think we're all tired from COVID anyway, right? I'm tired. Must I really relive the details of an experience to be understood? When we're writers, especially, we're doing this, right? We must recount details And we have to labor over it. It's not just a quick anecdote we're telling someone. We have to sit and think about it. We have to find the right language and so on. Perhaps I'm hoping the effort is worth it. I'm always asking, is it worth it? But this is another conversation. In any case, here we go. My kid wrote, the video was, quote, belittling, bigoted, and made a spectacle of other cultures' foods. After giving the essay a quick once over, I could have suggested changes to soften the language, to shift the tone, to avoid offending the teacher, which would probably reduce backlash and stress from my child, etc., and so on. It's a lot to think about. It's a lot to think about these strategies, but I didn't suggest any changes because the observations were true. It would be more interesting to keep things simple, let my kids speak honestly, and allow the teacher to receive it as is. The language would be hard for the teacher to swallow. I knew this. You start using language like racist and bigoted, and you are setting off fire alarms, right? So here we go. Admittedly, my child grew up with two parents who are poets and educators, and not only recognizes, but utilizes the power of language too. It was no surprise, therefore, to find out that the critique was hard to hear, and after the paper was read out loud in the classroom, the teacher said that she, in turn, felt belittled by my kids' presentation. A ratio was created, belittled, belittled. The subsequent dialogue in the classroom created ripples. So here you guys go, you may note I have created visual ripples on the page in my essay. It's something to think about. I want you to remember that you can use different forms and fonts and all kinds of fun things in your essays. It's an option. Think it through. Think about what you're doing. We don't want to be, we don't want to distract the reader from the content, but some of these visuals are available to you. Now, in making some of these choices, this did actually make this essay difficult for certain journals to accept. So my editor suggested several journals to send this to. Some of those journals were very sort of straight-laced. They have a certain style in their online essays, their publications, and they were not able to accept this essay. And that was not a problem for me. I completely understood. They were just more sort of news-oriented journals. This one, the offing, is oriented towards poetics, literature, and so on. So they were a bit more open. But this is available to you. I'm just putting it out there. So the subsequent dialogue in the classroom created ripples, noticeably so, sparking heated discussion and chatter. Classmates' eyes, my child's face, until my kid walked the halls to the school bathroom to text me from a stall, crying, feeling what it is to really be little, a hard lesson in world history, a lesson I learned at that age too. When I'm feeling emotional, I like to write about writing. It's called the reflexive, right? I do this instinctively. I soothe myself into the world of making. I feel at peace. For example, the text size in the previous paragraph creates a shapely feeling. It therefore contributes to form, which I give a lot of thought to. Already this piece has taken several forms. I cannot decide if it works best in prose blocks, in couplets, or as loose organic paragraphs. With patience, it will find its proper shape. A period could arrive as a comma leaves. Sentences slip into short, lucid dreams. I don't recommend trying to break your essays up into couplets. I actually tried it. I was up late at night and I wonder if this could work as I was feeling experimental. So I thought I would see if I could break the whole thing up into couplets. Just it did not work. It was a fail. But that's okay, you know. Give it a try. You know, you could try all kinds of different forms for your work. Doesn't hurt, and then just revert to the previous document if it doesn't work. Because one word creates a new life, I'm sure of this. From that moment forward, I view a written piece as a being with its own needs. The piece will tell me when, how, where to break a line. It will sometimes ask me to listen in the middle of the night. And so, tonight, although my eyes are raw, I get out of bed to come to the page to write about ripples radiating into the following week at my kid's school when the same teacher uttered the words S asterisk F, V asterisk G asterisk and R asterisk D S K asterisk N. I have to spell it out. During a lesson about colonialism and imperialism in another class. Upon receiving a distressing text from my kid again, I rushed in brisk, steely strides to the school's front office for an impromptu meeting with the teacher and principal. I was told that these terms were spoken in the context of understanding how language has been used by colonizers historically to dehumanize. The words spoken by this teacher were not intended to be derogatory, nor to dehumanize the students themselves, they explained. This situation is comparable to anaphora, if I were to use poetry lingo, as in the way I'm given explanations when I confront situations like this. I'm offered familiar, repetitive, sensible reasons, certainly no malintent, I'm assured, and in the face of these explanations, most times I drift on a ripple out the door, back to my car, to the quiet edge of rage. I'll say this in fairness. I have since corresponded with the teacher and offered to visit her classes to speak about colonization from firsthand Native experience. I offer this to support the Native students, not her. Our exchange nonetheless has been cordial, careful. Likewise, the piece of writing here isn't aimed at dehumanizing the teacher. If the teacher reads this and again feels belittled or betrayed or a rise in blood pressure, she might keep in mind that she appears in this piece only as a figure to illustrate the subject matter, much like the language used in her classroom. In fact, this piece isn't interested in the teacher much at all. That's what this piece tells me. This piece wants to talk about our young people, the native students who felt sick upon hearing those words in their classroom, who spoke up and bore the blows of white liberal fragility. This piece wants to talk about our children's bravery and what they in turn have taught me. Our native youth these days don't care about context for uttering dehumanizing words. They say they don't want to hear non-native people speak those words. They don't want to hear those words. They don't want to hear those words in the space around them. In Lakota language, the word for child is wakanaja. Forgive my spelling, there are a number of ways to write it. But what's important to know is the root of wakanaja is wakan, meaning holy or sacred. Thus, whenever we say the word child in Lakota language, we are calling a child a quote, sacred being. I take that seriously. When I think about a person, a site, or an object that is sacred, I also think about the surrounding space. I've watched how children affect us. In their presence, generally speaking, this includes maybe some young people here, I don't know. I want to expand the idea of child to just, young people. They affect the space around us. And I watched how they affect us. In their presence, generally speaking, we are instinctively careful with what we do and say, highly conscious of the language we use. Generally, that is, when we regard them as sacred, or most importantly, when we love them. Okay, so I'm gonna maybe skim over some of these parts so that we can just to save a little bit of time. But in these paragraphs, I talk about a conversation with my kid about what's okay, what's not okay to say. And, we had a friend, a relative who felt like it was okay for non-native people to say the R word or the S word in educational settings. And I said, well, I can see how that might be okay. And my kid said, I don't agree with either of you. And so what I realized in that moment is that now it is my job to listen. I have to listen. And I am learning from the young people. They are making the rules for us now. Okay, so we're all connected in this process of change. And so we have to honor that. Here I'm talking about another mother, a native mother in the community who also stepped in, and how we shared some of our experiences, educational experiences too. She dropped out in 9th grade, I dropped out in 11th grade. We too just could not take it. We only got so far. Of course, I went on to college later in life. But these settings and these environments, when we start talking to each other as community members, we find that we have a lot of similar stories. And now we are, as mothers, helping our young ones face those same situations. This is a paragraph, I'm going to read this paragraph actually because as we were having this conversation, my kid's friend chimed in. I told the kids, you think I would get stronger as I get older? And then I said it as the teens ate their fries, etc. But I'm getting weaker. Can you believe it? this episode at your school really hit me hard. The other night, I woke up sweating with a stomach ache and a backache. I lay in bed, bent sideways like a comma. I knew that nothing, no shift in position, no other bed, no over-the-counter medication would ease me. Somehow what happened to you at school brought back all my old past. This is called the weathering effect, he told me. I gave a whole presentation on that, my kids' friends said. It's like rocks in a backpack. More rocks get put into the backpack as we live through things. We carry them around and they get heavier and heavier with time. If we're not careful, we pass them on to our children. We take that whole backpack of rocks and we give them to our kids. And this was transformative learning this, because I had realized how much I've been passing on to my kid. This and this happened to me, this and this, how teachers are, how schools are, and then pretty soon my kid was carrying that around too, along, with personal experiences. I was astounded. This beautiful teenager already knew the language for what happens to us, the chipping away at our minds and bodies, why it hurts more over the years. We think as we get older, we get stronger, but I have found the opposite in my case. I could get backaches, and I get headaches suddenly, and boom, 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 boom. It's because it's accumulation, what you call an accumulation. All right. Sometimes I watch online lectures and presentations by Faith Spotted Eagle. This is a beautiful person. You can maybe Google her or find her some videos on YouTube. When I need uplifting, I enjoy her videos because of her advocacy for Native rights and also because she has a background in trauma and recovery. She offers useful knowledge about the accumulation of what's happening to us. There's one video in particular that's helped me gather my thoughts and reflect on the importance of sharing and listening. The transformative chemistry. Faith Spotted Eagle's words are better than mine on this subject. So this is what Faith said in this particular video about sharing our stories. When we talk about these losses and these traumas, it's important since the student body that will be watching this is Native and non-Native. It's important that when we talk about this, it is not to impart a sense of guilt. It is to impart a sense of freedom from denial. It's a liberation. When you look at that trauma response, the Native people's objective is to heal. The non-Native people's objective is to come out of denial. And I would propose that's a form of healing too. Right? If we look at our personal lives, when we are in denial about something, we're covering it up. We're carrying a kind of sickness. And so it is healing when we start opening up about that, come out of denial. So I think it's actually healing on both sides. And when these folks can come out of denial and these ones can start to heal, they can start to come together on common ground. When I visit my kids' high school next week to discuss colonization, specifically boarding schools, I'll note that this process of child internment and cultural erasure is not unique to the US at all. It's been implemented world over wherever Europeans sought to take land and build, quote, empires. It's a systemic method for mentally, spiritually, and emotionally destroying the original people of those lands. So I'm assuming most of you guys are familiar with the boarding school era in this country. I've seen a lot of yeses. If you are not, you can Google it. It takes just a minute. But it's really not that long ago. My father went to boarding school K through 12. So the effects of that era are, present within me, even. So the way that being in these schools for our elders, our parents, our aunties and uncles, it did affect our families and our emotional relationships and so on. So I was telling this to the driver yesterday who drove me. And I don't know, he was asking me questions, but I reminded him even that it was within my own lifetime, after I was born, if you can believe this, that Native people were actually allowed to pray in our own way. Our own religious freedom was finally granted after I was born within my lifetime. So all those years, like we're talking about hundreds of years, that we had to pray and keep our spiritual ways, our ceremonies and so forth quiet underground. This is long after the establishment of the US. So this history is not far removed. It's very present within a lot of us, our bodies, our minds, and our family. So I'll emphasize that this boarding school era is not something of the past, done and gone. I'll discuss the ways in which we continue to feel the effects in present day community and family. I'll begin my presentation by showing Faith Spotted Eagle's short video, and then hopefully that'll create space for some of the Native students to share their stories too. Okay, I'm just going to skip a little because I do actually want to move into part two, so I'm just going to quickly read this. To thread our past to the present, I'll tell the high school students about recent events, rooted in history but freshly grieved. Some months ago, the remains of 215 children at Kamloops Indian Residential School in Canada were discovered. Did you guys hear about this? This was last year. Okay. Now, that news hit us with a crushing wave, an earthquake really, because the loss of the past is experienced presently, then and now, as one and the same. Meaning, our little ancestors are still our children today. This makes sense. Since that first discovery at Kamloops, the number of Native children's remains detected at Canadian residential schools has by some counts exceeded 10,000. So I don't know if you've been watching the news, but there are now over 10,000 bodies found on these boarding school properties, and they have only gone to a fraction of the whole country of Canada. So really, I don't know how many they will find, but they're using the radar and going all along the ground. So it's unmarked, these things, but as this process has only recently begun, I assume that the number will multiply exponentially. I await the day when radar detection begins here in the US on the grounds of American boarding schools. I imagine a national trembling in this potential. But would Americans really tremble at such discoveries? This is a question that doesn't need answering, that I am compelled to ask is the answer itself. Just 2 months after the discovery at Kamloops in July, the remains of 9 Lakota children were returned from Carlisle Indian Boarding School in Pennsylvania to their homelands on Rosebud in South Dakota. It took 7 or 8 years of negotiations to arrange this. So I'm going to summarize here. So this happened in the summer. We were visiting our relatives, and so we were there when they returned those children home to Rosebud. Our family is from Pine Ridge. They're like right next to each other. It just takes like 30 minutes to an hour to drive. So we were there for the funeral and it was really one of the most powerful, most moving events I've been to have all those little children and to hear the stories from family, from their families, from community and so on, and the honoring. Everyone came, it was held in a gym at the college, the observance, and people brought gifts. Those tables were filled with gifts, little clothing. People made clothing for these children. So it was really special to be there as part of that observance. And these are the names: Dora Herpipe, Brave Wolf; Dennis Strikes First, Blue Tomahawk; Rose Longface, Little Hawk; Lucy Take the Tail, Pretty Eagle; Warren Painter, or Bear Paints Dirt; Ernest Knocks Off, White Thunder; Maud Little Girl, Swift Bear; Friend Hollow Horn, and Alvin Roaster, also called Kill 7 Horses. And I'll summarize this quickly again. If you look at Ernest Knocks Off and Maud Little Girl, you'll see White Thunder and Swift Bear next to their names. Those are the names of their families, but really their fathers. So earlier in the essay I had addressed, where I talked about these 2 Sichangu leaders who had asked to have their children's remains returned, and they were denied that request. So, and those are their fathers. I found that actual handwritten letter online, and it was really heartbreaking. But all of these years later, their request was finally fulfilled by the community. Okay, I'm going to move into part 2, because that's the fun part. And I'm actually going to show PowerPoint presentation. It's exactly the same text, but it's easier to view because there are photographs. Here we go. Okay, so this is part 2. If you go online, you're going to see the same thing. Part 2 is titled Metamorphosis, and this is the part that I wanted to share most with you. Writing essays to encourage you to think about the different things that you can include. You're allowed to do this. In some ways, there's maybe, quote, rules for writing essays, but there's also a lot of freedom, and I want you to feel that freedom to, to be an artist. You guys are artists, right? Okay. Part 2 is titled Metamorphosis. Okay. So you're going to see a combination poetry, photographs, and so on in this. So, anyway, I'm offering this to you as food for thought, for form. We're talking about form, right? Okay. When we first heard about the discovery of 215 children's remains found at Kamloops Indian Residential School in Canada, my child and I were wrought, our faces flattened into paper maps, pockmarked by countless X's. All those child internment schools and our little ancestors. Felt strange as a mother to look toward the passenger seat of our car and encounter a 500-year sadness along my child's sweet mouth. All of us, our relatives, native friends, and colleagues, were shaken and rocked. We rode a seismic tremor through the land. Did you feel it? 3 of my relatives could not speak about the subject, as in they said, I can't talk about it. And their eyes watered with our words instead. To this I am witness. I am supposed to be a person with a command of language, yet I refuse to command anything at moments like this. As this is a hanging crystal, each edge sharper feeling. Rage on this point, and as the crystal twirls, grief flashes, then empty. And do you know that crystals are formed by slow, magmatic metamorphosis? That pressure, right? Pressure changes us. I say us, right? We're all crystals in a way. I want to remind my relatives that the crystal's metamorphic essence is thus its greatest, but I cannot say it. The word commands me to respect its privacy, protect its strength. What can I write anyway? What words have any when a Milky Way of accounts have already been spoken, written, and prayed? A lot of you may feel this. You may come from communities with various backgrounds, all of you. I bet all of you can look into your history of publications, books, articles, what have you. Many people in your community have already written accounts and stories, So as writers, we'll sit down and say, well, what do I have to say that's different or new? Something to think about. But each of us do have unique experiences. So it's really looking into that and not being afraid, sharing. Among the many, our beloved ancestor Zint Kala Shah wrote about her boarding school days. Zint Kala Shah is a fantastic writer you might look up from our community about her boarding school days. And when I read her pages, I read a story we already know. These accounts ran like veins in the crystal of our land's bedrock. Someone threw up the curtains, Zint Kala Shah wrote, and the room was filled with sudden light. What caused them to stoop and look under the bed, I do not know. I remember being dragged out, though I resisted by kicking and scratching wildly. In spite of myself, I was carried downstairs and tied fast in a chair. I cried aloud, shaking my head all the while, until I felt the cold blades of the scissors against my neck. and heard them gnaw off one of my thick braids. Then I lost my spirit. Suddenly, my child and I, my child and I together, all that of our feelings, what could we do but make? We began to move our hands. Why? I don't know. We began to braid. Why? It is a mystery, except we had to. So in my house, I had all these spools of fringe. Have you guys seen fringe? So we use fringe to make certain clothing items in our traditional clothing. So I had like pink and black and all silver, and so I had some big spools of this sort of off-white kind of pearlescent fringe. And we started cutting long strands and we started braiding them. We didn't know why, we didn't know what we were going to do with them, but we just started moving our hands because we had a lot of feelings of, mostly it was that we had a lot of feelings and we didn't know what to do with it. So here you are, I'm sure a lot of you have felt that way. As artists, as young people, you're feeling a sense of urgency, you want to do something, but you don't know what. Well, this is an example, we didn't know what, but we just started braiding. We braided and braided, our action accumulated. We moved our hands along the strands with a firm hold but gentle touch, quickly yet carefully, as if braiding the hair of a niece or nephew in the morning before school. We kept braiding until 215. So you see here, this is our stack of braids. And then on the ends, we started to put copper wire and those silver tips. If you can see it in the picture, we put silver tips and copper wire. Because as we were braiding, I didn't know exactly what we were going to do with those braids, but as we were braiding, I began to formulate and I realized we're going to need to attach, if we use these braids, we'll need to attach it to something. So I love working with silver and copper. So I started using these things, or putting these things on the end of the braids. Then the braids asked for a form to hold them. And you see here, this is a roll of silver window screen. I like to use accessible materials a lot. So you can get window screen at the hardware store, you know, and a big thing of, big scissors. And if any of you work visually, window screen is super fun to work with because it's moldable, bendable, and it has a kind of transparency, and you can cut it easily, so it's one of my favorite things to work with. The braids ask for a form to hold them. And you see here, we started to attach them to the edge of the edges of the window screen. And this is at the table. mornings, Auntie came over to help us. Us, 3 generations making. Isn't she cute? That's my Aunt Tilda. Our words were unnecessary. It was more important to be together on the land in our. We trusted the process, a gradual metamorphosis of our little braids into. Do you see it? And so what you see here is eventually that form with a little plan, of course, and it came to us. But this here is what we call a wing dress. This is a traditional style of dress from our culture, the Northern Plains. Women's dress, the um, sleeves. I'm searching for the word sleeve. The sleeves are really wide. And then we often have like fringe or different things at the edges of the sleeves. And so yeah, this ended up being the way that we attached the braids. And what I pictured was that this dress would carry those braids back to our little ones. We trusted because we listened. Okay. So that is actually the end of the PowerPoint for that particular project. And I want to see where we're at, kind of, because I see some poor students nodding off and getting sleepy. I don't want to bore you guys. So, but I do want to, I mean, because I've actually prepared other things, but we could sit with just this. What do you guys want? Shall I go further with other projects, or oh, I see, yes. Oh my gosh. Oh, okay, this goes maybe a few more minutes, right? And then we can maybe just have questions and have a conversation about it. And I also wanted to point out too, in that essay, in the second half, photographs I showed you, those are not highly polished photographs. Those were taken in the kitchen of my auntie's trailer. We were, we were staying with relatives at the time. We just had this big old cardboard tube. We hung it up between the refrigerator and the stove and took our pictures like that. That piece was actually acquired by Lakota Art, the Oglala Lakota Art Space. So it's displayed in a presently displayed in a very beautiful space with proper stand and lighting, but that is not what I wanted for this essay. I wanted people to be close to us. There's a kind of formality that I wanted to abandon. That's not what this work is about. It's not about a gallery space, certainly not. But ultimately, that gallery space was in our community, among our people, which feels right too. So I feel glad that the dress is there on Pine Ridge, because me, my kid, and my aunt all made it together. So, and it's a visual language. The wing dress, for example, is something that people recognize right away when they come in, Lakota people. So we're working with visual imagery, a kind of language that our community recognizes. So that's nice too, that it's there in that place. But those are maybe things I'm sharing with you, like even the photographs, the way that what I wanted to share online when it was published. These are all considerations that you may take with you if you work in this forum. All of this creates a kind of tone, kind of effect for your work, right? So not everything has to be highly polished, highly, slick and sleek and glamorous. You can allow people into just who you are as a regular person. Right? I always like to talk about that in our language. There's a word called ikje in Lakota language, and that means it translates to regular or common or ordinary. This word ikje, and if you can imagine in our culture, to be ikje is actually a virtue. To be regular, to be common is a virtue. So that is to say, we give things to our community, we give things to our people, we give the best that we can. But we ourselves, we are among the regular, you know? So I use that also in how I think about my work. Um, oh, I hate these things. What is this? Don't do that. I hate. I don't even know. I have so many things on my computer going on. We'll go for a few more minutes. Yo, we could do this all day. We really could. We could talk about art and stuff all day. I love it. So, but I'm gonna go a few more minutes and then I'll end. And then we'll have some questions and discussion. So I'm going to talk about materials. And I'm going to say also with this presentation, this PowerPoint, there's no real conclusion that I'm going to give you. I'm just thinking out loud with you. Okay, that's what Bart does. It thinks. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? We're not answering, but we're thinking. Okay, so so we're going to think about some of this stuff. Who is this to bring into being, to make? So this is really what I wanted to remind you guys, is that when you're writing a poem, you're writing an essay, or of course, it's more obvious when you're working visually that you're making something. But when we're writing, it's so ephemeral, right? In the world of language and ideas. So it's not always something that we can touch. And so we can sometimes forget that we're making something, and we are building something. We are building something when we make a poem. Okay. So just think about some of those building blocks. There's so much that goes into our writing. If you're working on an essay this week, if you're working on a hybrid essay, if you've got some poetry, some lineated parts, you are building research. That's a building block, right? Maybe you're talking to Auntie like we did. Maybe you're talking to other relatives, learning some of your history, listening to certain stories. Those are building blocks that go into your work, and so on. Etymology, perhaps you're collecting some words and you're looking at the roots. You've got a whole list of words, and that's also part of going into the making, your materials. Material, matter. What are the materials that you're going to work with? What materials am I going to use? As a writer, what are my materials? Help me answer this. Well, let's see if I can type. I'm gonna type. As a writer, what are my materials? You guys help me. Farm? Is that a material? I suppose. Let's see.
Words.
Let's not, let's stay here on form. As a writer, what is your physical material to create form? Okay. Pen, ink, uh, paper. So then you have, let's see. You have a surface to write on. Does it have to be paper? That's what I want you to think about. Does it have to be the 8.5 by 11 white coffin? Does it? Who made that rule? Whoever made that rule, I'm mad at them. That's some baloney. We don't have to stick with that little white thing, and that is what I'm here to help you think about. This is not how I like to work. This is not always, sometimes I do start with that surface. I do, I admit it. But not always. 50% of the time, I start making something else. I make a wing dress. And I'll share some other exhibits. I make other things. And this is where I start. I'm moving my hands, and then the language starts to come. Okay? That's what I want to open you up to. You do not have to start on that paper, that 8.5. What other materials? We have the pen and ink, the paper. What else do you need if you're a writer? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I heard experiences and I heard something what?
To drink. To drink.
Something to drink. Okay. If we have memory. Did someone say memory?
Patient. Word. Language.
Words, language, ideas.
Inspiration. Passion.
Nice. Some of these are physical, and some of these are sort of qualities we need as a writer. The physical things include pen, ink, paper, surface. And I want to propose that words and language are physical too. They are physical. And I want to propose this just if you could think about it in this term, in this way. It is material, it has a physical effect on us. Okay, so I just like for sometimes my students to think about the chemical reaction even that language has on us in our bodies. First of all, language has to enter our body in some way or another, right? Physically, through the ear or through the eye, or some folks touch. They can read with their hands. So language has to enter the body through us physically. And then once it enters, it has a chemical effect on us, literally. We respond to it, we feel it. So give me a word. Cerebral. What do you feel when you hear the word cerebral? I'm not sure if I feel, I'm not sure what I feel with that. Let's see. Trunk? Oh. that was not a good one. All kinds of feels. Okay. So this experiment, and you could find so many different words, and you will feel it. You'll feel it somewhere. You'll feel it somewhere in your body. Are these the materials for the quad? Are these materials for the quad? In my case, they were. Yes, they were. I made that object, I took pictures, I put those pictures on a page, and the poem came. I consider what I wrote a hybrid essay. I also consider the second half a poem. All of it is integrated, all of it is together. What materials will I use to make, to decide? I don't think. First, I feel. What does my body want to do? In the case of Kamloops, in the case of the residential schools, I wanted to move my hands. So it's always like, do I want to speak or yell or explain or define something? Is that the urge? Is that the impulse I'm feeling? Is that what my body wants to do? There are times when it wants to do that. Or do my hands want to move, shape, twist, braid, or cut something? There are times when I want to do that too. I need to, how do I want to move this energy out of me? I'm going to spend just a couple minutes and show you another, like I said, we could do this all day because I have a number of projects. But I'm going to show you a project called Buffalo Book that I made years ago. This is one of my early projects, okay? That was in an exhibit at the Heritage Center on Pine Ridge. I made my copy. I'm like slowing down here. And this one, I was actually giving a lecture at Bard online a few months ago, and I was going to share this project, and I didn't have time. So here I am again, and I have a little time, and I'm going to share this as a project where there were a few successes, but I also considered it a failure in some ways too, and I like failures because I learn from my failures. I learn from, I sit with it and I say, why did this work? Or what did work? So this is, and as I said, I'll conclude with this and then we'll open it up. Because I don't have all this up, tied up with a bow. But just all I wanted to get us thinking about was making today and understanding that all of this can come into the page, no matter how you start, okay? This is called Buffalo Book, this piece I made. And what you see here is my interpretation of Buffalo Road, okay? And I just get a kick out of this because when I delivered it to the Heritage Center on Pine Ridge, of course, you know, our people are very familiar with Buffalo roads, all of that. So the girl working at the Heritage Center, she was Lakota, and I was taking the work out, the piece out of the vehicle, bringing it in, and she said, "Oh, what is this?" And I said, "It's a Buffalo Road." You know, the black with the silver, and she was just like, like, you took a lot of artistic freedom there. It did not look like a Buffalo Road to her. But anyway, So you can see long ago, I was working with window screen. Long ago, I used to live out in the country, like on the reservation, Navajo, at the time, I lived on the Navajo Nation here, with my kid's dad. So that's where he's from. So there was no fancy art stores. All of my, materials had to be from Ace Hardware Store, in Chinle. The store was about the size of this stage. And I had to get whatever I wanted with like just those things. So I like, as I said, even back then, I liked working with screen. This black is the nylon window screen. The silver is the aluminum. It's hard to tell in this picture, but that figure is almost 6 feet tall. The large buffalo at the top is about 4.5 feet high. So altogether, this piece, when we install it on the wall, it's about 10 to 11 feet um, from the top of that buffalo down to the floor. And then there's some cut wire. You see there's grass and roots on the bottom. And inside the buffalo, there's text. Inside each buffalo, I put text. It's very hard to see in this picture, but here's an example. So that's why I called it Buffalo Book. I used a font, a book font, kind of. I experimented, should I write it by hand? Should I write it in pencil? Should I write, I took some time with that, and I decided that I wanted it to be a kind of printed sort of look. And then this is the inside of that dress form, which I also made with chicken wire. I had to get at Ace Hardware. So I made this dress form with chicken wire, and you'll see down the center of it. Do you see that? It's like what I call the spine. There's like little pieces of paper, and they're all connected and they're running from the top. Can you guys see it from your angle? Yes, okay, you can. So goes to the building blocks of making and to text and what we can transport or import from our pieces onto the paper, onto the page. And also, there's one thing that is important to me in my work is that I learn and I grow. That determines what I spend my time on. Okay. So there's a way in which I have made certain commitments and agreements with my artwork. And one of those agreements is I will give 100% to my work. If I'm making something, 150, 1,000% of myself. I have little white hairs here. That's from those hours and hours, I think, of spending with the page or with pieces, and also being a parent to a teenager. But anyway, in return from my work, this agreement is it's important for me to learn and to grow. I need to learn something. So like the metamorphosis piece I showed you earlier, I actually worked with one of my nieces. She was my mentor. I have a niece who was my mentor, and she taught me all kinds of about Lakota style wing dresses. She was so cute. She was like sending me texts. Oh, I could show you, but I wish I had put it up there for you to see. She was like taking pictures of different dresses and drawing on them. You know how you can do that on your phone? Drawing, putting arrows, this and that, teaching me construction, different styles, because there's not just one style of wing dress, there's many. She was sending me historical dresses. And I learned so much. I learned so much from her and in making them. So in this piece you see here, the spine down the center, the exhibit, the overall exhibit was called Pater Oyate. Pater Oyate means buffalo people. Okay. In our culture, we believe that we are related or connected to the buffalo. You guys already know that, right? That's a big part of Plains culture, the buffalo. And so what I did was to prepare for this exhibit, that down the spine is actually family names in our community. And I collected all of these family names with the word bull in them, bull. And so you see a lot of like family names with bull. It doesn't refer to a cow, to cattle, and it refers to buffalo in our language, to the buffalo. And so that's old part of our history and our culture of understanding the ways in which we are connected to the buffalo. So I started calling relatives and friends in our community and asking them if they could help me put together this list. And I actually had a list that's much longer, but I couldn't fit all of them down the middle of this dress. But I'll read them, and you will see also in our culture and our language how image-based our language is, which is really beautiful as a poet, as a writer. There's so much for us to call upon. But here we go, Bullman. That's the first name because that's my grandma's family name. Bullman. Black bull, left hand bull, jumping bull, 3 bulls, short bull, crazy bull, 2 bulls, bull child, medicine bull, brown bull, thunder bull, bull chief, tall bull, wallowing bull, red bull, yellow bull, spotted bull, bad heart bull, plain bull, bull bear, white bull, eagle bull. They're so beautiful. I love these names. These are all of our families, not all of them, but a lot of families in our community. Now, this text comes from, I'm going to end here, but the text I'm going to share comes from the back of the dress. So each stanza you see is inside one of these buffaloes. Okay? This was, I don't know how many years ago, 10, 15, not 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago. I was in this exhibit. But this text actually came into my book, Whereas. So the opening piece to Whereas, the opening lines say, now make room in the mouth for grasses. A lot of people have interpreted those lines in many different ways, and sometimes very political ways and so on. But those lines actually came first from this exhibit. And it came out of thinking about and honoring who we are as a people and where we come from, our connection to the buffalo, to the land, to the grasses, and so on. And so this is the book I've been meaning to write. That's the first buffalo says. An account of each family member. Before me, after. To pronounce the names, sound out each letter. Make a space in the mouth for the grasses. And I think I will end there. So I want to make this time useful to you, and so if there's anything that you're thinking about or you'd like to talk about, be happy to.
Hi, you discussed briefly an issue with finding the right publisher for you and for your work. Can you describe more of that process?
Publishing is a whole other aspect of our work, right? Okay. I will share my experience with publishing. However, as young people, take all of this as with a grain of salt. I actually don't recommend my way of um, walking through the world. I don't actually recommend it to everyone, but it is the way, it is my experience because of who I am. So we have to think about who we are, and, our particular character and our sensitivities and our way. So when I was in college, undergrad, new in my poetry studies, I had a professor who came in, a teacher one day who came in and said, hey, there's this call for Native poets and in this journal. And I think you would be good for it. So he encouraged me to submit, and I had never submitted before. And so I was really nervous, and I worked so hard. Again, my little white hairs. I worked really hard, like three or four nights. I stayed up really late, revising and getting these pieces ready. And I sent them in. Finally, the deadline, I sent them in. And I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And then I remember like a month later or whatever, however much time, I got an email back. And I was rejected. And I remember I was sitting in the computer lab and on campus, and I started crying so hard. It hurt so much. I didn't want anyone to see, but I cried and cried. So now, at that moment, I decided for myself I would never send my work where it was not wanted. I felt like it was a part of myself at that time. And the way that I walk in the world is I go by invitation. When someone invites me to their home or invites me to a place, I feel welcome and I go, right? I don't go to places necessarily that, I don't go crash parties. Or I don't go. So that's what I decided at that time, after my first rejection. And from then on, I built my career on invitations. So mostly anything that is published online or wherever in journal is because someone asked me. So, and it took time to build my career that way, but generally, I would say in many ways, I'm not very ambitious. I wasn't like, I want to be the best writer in the world. I didn't feel that way. So I just felt like I make things, and somehow, in a strange way, things fall into place. It's like I make things, and then there's certain invitations that I've had, and then I send it to. So that's how it worked. Even my book, Grey Wolf, the editor read one of my pieces online, and he sent me a message on Facebook, of all things. This was years ago. And I didn't know who this guy was. And my partner at the time, I said, hey, I got this message from so-and-so, and it's press, Grey Wolf Press. I didn't know anything about publishing, about all that stuff. And my partner said, oh, yeah, that's a pretty good press, and I know that editor. I was like, oh. So I stayed in touch with him, and when I was ready, I sent him. It was like a few years later, I sent him my manuscript. That's how things have worked for me, because of who I am. Now, I have friends who are not so sensitive. Bro, I cry about everything, like literally. I'm crying all the time, it's ridiculous. So I'm just a very sensitive, feely person all the time, just feeling everything. Feeling. That's who I am. I have friends who literally keep Excel sheets. They don't care. They send their poems here and there and there and there. They have the Excel sheet with the date, the journal, what poem rejected or accepted, and they are very detached, and they really don't feel upset or whatever, downhearted if it's not accepted. They send it out somewhere else. It's just like, so they're fine with that, and I think that's really cool too. I like that way. Now, I will say the piece I shared in the offering, that symbolizes growth, because this is the first piece all these years later. I'm getting old now. All these years later, I sent my work out without being invited, first time. But I'm more courageous now, and I understand a bit more about publishing. I understand that if some journals do not accept your work, it's because they have, like I told you, like maybe some are more journalistic. They have a certain style, they have certain requirements. My essay had a bunch of parentheses, ripples, and photos. So I completely understood, and I was okay with that. So there were a number, we put together, me and my editor and one of my friends, I had a list of like 5 journals, and I started contacting people, and then it ended up in the offering. I felt like that was a great place. And by coincidence, the essay editor at the offering ended up being a young native writer herself. This was unplanned, but she's Umatilla and a graduate of the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is where I went to school and I teach there now. So, things happen magically. But that's my experience. It's mostly completely by invitation. I don't necessarily recommend it to young people, but I am also an example that shy, sensitive people can somehow find their way through the world too. And sometimes, yeah. Oh, there's a person in the back. Yeah.
I was just curious, so you have a writing that has like blanks in it. Do you like sometimes come up with the words in your head? Did you like read out like blank?
I have the word that fits in my head, and then what did you say?
I was just curious, like when you read it out to yourself, do you ever like think of the word that would fit in the blank, or you just leave it as blank? Do you read it as blank in your head, like the space?
Oh, it's a word. It's a word, yes, there's a word, and I'll just share it with you casually, since, yeah. The word is power, so it's a particular word, but I could not put that word power on the page, because I put it on the page and initially, and I felt like I was giving it away. And I wanted to keep that word for us, for our community. As I said, in the piece that I was saying to my relatives, I said, I want to remind my relatives that metamorphosis is the crystal's greatest power. The ability to change, that power. But I couldn't write it down, I just couldn't. So every time you see a blank in that piece, for example, it is that word. It's a very specific word, yes.
Hi, so I was just, first of all, I absolutely adore your writing style, I think it's so beautiful. And I was just wondering, like, in pieces where you incorporate like visual art with your writing, how do you know when it's like complete? And then in a piece, if it's just writing or just art, like, how do you know when to kind of just like lay it to rest and let it be? How do you like naturally come to a conclusion? Because I feel like in a lot of my writing, I just want to keep pushing and keep putting more out if I feel like I can, but I don't know how to like just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Okay, how do I know when it's complete? So in a lot of these works, of course, the essay, the poems, or even the visual works, when I get a kick out of course, I'm showing you everything overhead. What you do not see is that, like when my kid and auntie and I were working, that's visually speaking. You don't see me. I was literally in my jammies until 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I woke up in the morning and I went straight to work. And I was gross. I was disgusting. I did not brush my teeth. Auntie was over there, and I should have been embarrassed, but I was like, Auntie, I need to work. So that is what you don't see. Like, I'm like busting my butt, right? Especially when I'm doing visual pieces. But the same goes for my writing. I do that too. I often write at night. And it's because it's uninterrupted. It's quiet. I started out when I had a kid. So I'll start writing around 10 o'clock and I'll write until 3 or 4 a.m. Okay, and time goes like that, right? The next day, I'm a wreck. I'm just a little bit fried, but I put 100% in it, and I keep putting it in until I cannot put any more. That is when I know I have to conclude. So, especially with my written work, I feel we are so accountable as writers. There's something about language, something about text that I feel highly accountable. Of course, because people come back and they ask you about what does this line mean, or why I had this writer sit down and visit my home, and he sat and questioned me about one line in my poems that said Lakota means friend or ally. And this man wanted to know, is it friend or ally? And he had so many reasons why it was important to differentiate. I said, bro, I don't know. Like, literally, if you talk to any of my relatives, they're gonna say the same thing, it means friend or ally. Like, that's what we say, in our community. Like, we're working with English versus Lakota. So that it's like, we have to work with, open that translation up, right? And so we had this big long conversation. And so that's what I'm trying to say is like, there's something about language that requires us, and nothing can be perfect, I know that, but it requires this extra measure of detail and perfectionism, if you will. But I also need to be relaxed. Like, we don't want our for it to be rigid and like, it has to be supple too. And it has to be round, and it has to have feeling, and it does not have to be perfect. So it's always balancing this stuff, right? So I go until I can't anymore. Right? If I have a wiggling feeling, if there's a certain word, if there's a certain line that just wiggles, I go back to it. You won't regret it, you know. If, if something is still kind of tapping at you. But the other thing that helps me conclude is deadlines. So that's what it is, a deadline. Deadlines help. So I work as hard as I can up to the last minute, and then it's done, and I release myself. I go take a shower, I have a nice meal, and I say, good job, I'm finished. Yeah.
You've spoken a lot about your experiences as a mother. I'm wondering about your experiences as a daughter with your own mother, and also how becoming a mother, being a mother, has influenced your work.
That's an interesting question. Oh my gosh. It's a little separate from writing, okay? Very personal question, but it's connected to writing, I suppose, too. The way I see the connection is I rarely ever write about my mom. And I was thinking about that. I write about my daughter all the time. And I think it's because, and I just made a mistake. My kid identifies as he, him now. So we have that happening. But I revert to early childhood. But anyway, I write about my kid all the time. And I think it's because that's an anchor. It's a place of safety. It grounds me, my kid. My mother, however, right? Oh my God. No. That's a Pandora's box. That's deep. Do I want to share all of that publicly? No. I don't. I don't really go there. Because that's probably my relationship with my mom is one of the most complex relationships. My love for my mom is deep, and I care for her now. She's 85, so I help my mom out. She lives with us. But that's interesting you would ask that. Like, it doesn't come into my work a lot. It may come into my work one day. But the other thing about that is it coincides with certain, I have little rules for myself as a writer. One of those, and this does not have to apply to everyone, so please don't take this on as your own. But one of my rules is when I write things, you'll see in whereas, for example, or even what I shared today with my kid. I had my kid read that whole essay before I published it to make sure it felt right. And whereas you'll see me mention an auntie, a mentor, a friend, I ask those people, I show them those pieces first before I publish them. Even though I never mention names, I don't want my friends or relatives to come and say, is that me? Or to feel, for me, it's important that the piece isn't all rainbows or it isn't all, flowers, but I don't want to hurt people. Relationships are important to me. So with my mother, I think I kind of go along the surface, out of care. I want to care for her and keeping that relationship intact.
I have one question about language, since this actually came up in one of our earlier classes, but in the part where you were talking about, language, used for purposes of hurting people, and if you're like forgive me if you guys already answers this, but one, even in like a class, then one cannot say like, they called them these things. Like, is that what you are saying, or I'm just not entirely?
Oh, you mean like the R word and the S word?
Yes, since you mentioned them.
Right, so like, the essay was kind of about how the young native kids, at least in our area, I can't talk about all native children everywhere, okay? I'm talking about my kid and kids at the school. They have asked us to say R word and S word. That's what they asked. Because that language really does have a strong, deep history. It's like, even me, I hear those, and the hair on my neck sticks up. I can't stand it, right? And so maybe they're asking out of courtesy, listen, if you're not native, please, give this a try. And yeah, so.
Hi, I was curious about how in the whereas poems, you came across that legal format with the whereas beginning word and the semicolon ended. How did you come across the structure and what about it spoke to becoming a poetic form?
Yeah, that actually came from the actual national apology itself. If you go online and you look at that national apology was a resolution. So if you're familiar with congressional resolutions, they all have those whereas statements. So that is how I got that form. I began each of those pieces with, and there's 20 of them inside that section, the whereas section. So I just use that as a mirror towards the national apology where there's 20 whereas statements. You can find those online. Followed up with 7 resolutions and then 2 disclaimers. So when you read whereas, you'll see the same structure.
So you mentioned that you live in New Mexico, exactly Santa Fe.
Yeah.
And I think that was the first place where they ever exploded a nuclear bomb. I think Santa Fe was the first place ever.
I think, yeah, Los Alamos area.
Yeah, exactly. So I was just curious to know if you've written about the topic or engaged in any way with your work in that.
And no, not so far. But not out of a conscious, it was not a decision that I won't write about that. It's because I've been distracted and writing about other things at the moment. But I like that. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, I see one now.
Thank you so much for all you've shared with us today. Something that we've really been talking about in LMT and that I've been using on is this kind of idea of a common language. So I'm interested what role you think the poet plays in facilitating a common language.
How are you guys talking? What does that mean to you? How are you guys talking about?
I guess to me, like the common language, there's both nuance and how it isn't necessarily a positive thing, but in the context of this question, I'm thinking of the common language as something that connects humans across identities and across groups and ethnicities and things like that.
I don't know, I think because I'm a poet, we talk a lot about like abstract and concrete language, all right? And we talk a lot about specificity and how important that is in our work, right? Moving from the general to the specific image and not to be afraid of that. Because sometimes, especially in my early days, in my early writing, I relied heavily on general language or abstractions because I wasn't sure if people would, if the specifics of my certain experience or certain language would be relatable to others. But in fact, I found it to be quite the opposite. It is something that helps as little anchors or fish hooks that people can grab onto and surprisingly can relate to. I shared earlier, for example, the word ikche from our language. Ikche, to be common to. That's a very, very specific Lakota idea. It's very central to our culture and how we importantly, that we walk in the world, right? But when I talked about this in this very specific term, I saw a lot of people nod their heads. And so it is something I think that translates, that many people can relate to, whatever background you're from. So the common language, and I don't even know if I'm answering your question or if I'm getting to it. I think that we must also, if there is a common language, I think that we mustn't be afraid of the specificity of who we are to enter into that sphere of common language. I don't know that, sure. Is that it? I see Bill going, maybe that's it. Okay, so I'm gonna say thank you everyone.